All right. So my name's Anastasia Yokum, and I manage the Prechter Bipolar Research Program data pipelines and flow. Today, I'm really going to just focus on our longitudinal study and how recently, with the help of Jeremy and Brittany, actually not help, they actually did it. It's now available university-wide, which I think is a great resource to use. Our leader is Melvin McGinnis. He's a professor of bipolar disorder and depression and a clinician at the university. How come that's not working? Weird. Okay. All right. So the Prechter Bipolar Research Group is actually named after Heinz C. Prechter, really successful businessman. He's the guy who invented the sunroof in your car. And so he lived with bipolar disorder, and unfortunately, at a very early age, he committed suicide. Throughout his life and his early death, the family had already recognized an urgency for new knowledge and treatments for bipolar disorder. And so they established a fairly large research fund at the university, which is now called the Prechter Bipolar Research Program. His vision was simple, but like yet complex in that he believed in a future where individuals with the illness could lead a very healthy and productive life, but he wanted that done through evidence-based treatment. Starting in 2006, so we are well on our way into our 16th or 17th year right now. A total of about 1440 participants have enrolled in the study, and on the left are the current numbers for the cohort. But over time, you can imagine people, we lose contact with them due to illness, or they simply withdraw from the study, or they discontinue, or we end up screening folks, enrolling folks, and then we find out a little bit later that they're not, they don't want to be in the study. So at first blush, we have active around 900 participants, and that takes a fair amount of work, which you'll see hopefully in the next couple of slides. And I'm going to push through a lot of this quickly until we get to the architecture, because I think most of the people here are interested more in the architecture. But upon screening, we collect a lot of demographics information, and we use what's called the diagnostic interview for genetic studies. We've now just migrated over into the SCID-5, which uses the DSM-5 diagnoses. But it's a very deep clinical phenotype of these folks. It's assessed by at least 3 clinicians, and it includes age of onset, number of episodes, and not just for bipolar disorder, but for a host of other psychiatric disturbances, including substance use and abuse. We collect biological fluids, and in which point we had gotten, I think, about 50% of our cohort is, we do have genetics on a SNP array for them. And then our actual mood measures begin. And this is a complicated slide, and I apologize for that, but I just want to go through, like, at baseline, at recruiting, at that screening meeting, we go ahead and we collect 7 additional surveys. Those run the gamut of childhood trauma, a working alliance inventory, which kind of discusses how people relate to their therapy provider, seasonal affective questionnaires, impulsivity, aggressiveness. Then every 5 years, we complete a neuropsychological battery, which tests cognitive. So that's like working memory, visual acuity, stuff like that. And at that time, we also, a clinician, will administer measures on depression, mania, and social phobia. Then every 2 years, we collect what we call the life, which is like their interval of the last 2 years, what medical, psychiatric treatments and history has happened in those last 2 years. And then we get an update on their prescriptions. We also, at that time, collect the Columbia Suicide Scale and, again, the social phobia. Then every year we collect diverse measures on sleep habits, the relationships with their families, more depression, more mania. We check in on life events that may have occurred, whether they got married or they were in a car crash or they witnessed a fire, right? That's happening every year. And then every 6 months, we check in on their substance use and abuse, which includes nicotine. And again, we capture another sleep index, which captures a lot of over-the-counter sleep medication that they're doing. And then every other month, we capture the PHQ, which is a depression measure, an anxiety, a mania measure, and then a health measure, which we call the SF-12, and then their quality of life. And again, we check in on events that may have happened in their life. So you can imagine, over the course of time, we collect a lot of data. And on the x-axis, what I'm showing here is the number of participants, and on the y-axis is the number of measurements. It's faceted by the frequency in which we collect. And as you can see, we have like almost 40, well, you have well over 40,000 mania and PHQ-9 measures. The dots are colored by their percent completion rate. So as you can imagine, in a longitudinal study that's been going on for 16, 17 years now, with an average participation rate of 9 years, just over 9 years now, there are time periods where people kind of pop in and complete stuff, and then there's time periods where they don't complete stuff. And so completion rate overall for the entire data set is well above 60%. But for some of these more frequent measures that we're collecting, it drops, or it increases over to about like 80%. Obviously, things that are clinician administered, we get at 100% capacity. But as you can see, like the pure breadth and depth of what we're collecting over time is pretty expansive. So the architecture of this, I don't want to say it's simple, but in hindsight, it actually feels that way. Everything is done through REDCap, whether it's clinician administered or if it's self-report. That made the COVID era for us for data collection, it didn't really impact us as much as a lot of other studies. So because everything was 100% digital at its time, we didn't have the blip that other people saw. In REDCap, I will say that like we have approximately 11 subparts of our study. So like when I say we collect neuropsychology every 5 years, we also have personality indexes. We also complete the self-report in a separate project in REDCap. We complete the clinician's diagnostic phenotyping in a different sub-project in REDCap. So in total, we have, I think, like 10 or 11 sub-projects that all kind of fold into the longitudinal program. So all of that had to be harmonized, right? So as you can imagine, like we can't have male be 1 in one subpart and a 0 in another. So all of that had to be harmonized. The record ID is harmonized across all the subparts. And even more importantly, like as researchers collaborate and they come and go and they have sub-studies, which are like a person says, hey, we really want to study the Prechter Bipolar Research participants, but we want to collect microbiome, or we want to do transcriptomics, or we want to do a very intensive sleep study. You name it. There's about another 40 sub-studies that have roots in the Prechter program, and that mean in the participants were 100% in the Prechter program, but they also have additional data and an additional PI. And my team takes ownership of that. And so it's really important for us later on for integration to say, all right, this person's in the sleep study, they're also in the Bloom study, they're also in this other study. And if the IRB allows us, then we can integrate all of that data pretty easily because we went through and harmonized and standardized all of our records. Anybody have any questions about that before I kind of move on?
I do have a quick question. So was the data harmonized like during the study design phase, or is that something you did in the database after the studies had started?
So that's a good question. So this study started in pen and paper. So in 2019, the pen and paper was put into it was actually put into an MS Access database. And that point, some of the harmonization and standardization happened, right? That was like the best time to do it when you transfer from paper. Then we made a conscious decision thereafter to make sure everything was harmonized and standardized. And what that meant for some subparts of the study, or even some studies, is that we would download the data, reintegrate it, recode it, whatever we needed to do, and then re-upload it into REDCap. So that REDCap becomes the final collection instrument. Did that answer?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So We also have all those biological samples in LabVantage. So exports of both LabVantage and REDCap come down together, and we integrate that on the back end. The REDCap is brought down through a series of, well, now they're automated API calls. These, and I should take a step back. Like, the study has probably 6,000 screened participants in it. And we are the largest project that's in MISHAR's umbrella that they support in REDCap. And so this forced us to not do any scoring, any calculations inside of REDCap, because things were just timing out. I mean, I think we have the largest RAM allocation for REDCap in the University of Michigan. So the constant interaction with the MISHAR folks to say, hey, this is timing out or this isn't working, really led us to say we can't do any data manipulation, any ETL in REDCap. And it's been somewhat of a struggle going forward to say to PIs, look, I know you want to calculate that in REDCap, but we're not going to let you do it because it's not something that we can easily control, but it's also something from just a resource management. It tends to really gunk up the work. So if you listen to nothing, I would say pretty strongly listen to this. Don't make REDCap be your ETL. Do that outside of REDCap. Okay, so does anybody have any questions? Actually, I'll stop on that one. Okay. All right. So we pull down the REDCap stuff through a series of APIs. That data then is integrated with a series of backend Python scripts. And so this is where we logic check on values. We score the surveys. That requires any reverse coding or any calculations that happen. We remove withdrawn participants because it's very important that those withdrawn participants are absolutely removed from any potential sharing going forward. We scrub any PHI. And then we submit completion rate for participants for their payment through our HISIP system, right? And then those exports occur daily for internal use. We also push recruitment status to a Tableau dashboard that actually the connections on that broke recently, so we're trying to fix that. But all of the manipulation, the ETL, is happening outside of REDCap. We use GitLab. All of the scripts have been factored in GitLab such that the PHQ score is a separate script. And then that PHQ-9 scoring script is called into any sub-studies that may need it. Does everybody understand what I'm talking about like that? So if we have a change because of a version, the PHQ-9 all of a sudden goes to PHQ-10. That hasn't happened yet. But if a change happens, then we've factorized the scoring to be able to make sure that it hits every sub-study that it's being used in. And this has happened for the SF12, where there was a change in reverse scoring, or potentially a researcher wants to use a different version of scoring the alcohol use questionnaire. Then we have that as a sub-score and a subscript in the entire pipeline. So it's called in on the specific study that needs that. And so a little bit of organization on the front end. It's all in GitLab. It has version control, the security that ITS gives us for that. And we have a development server where we can test stuff out before we migrate things over into a production server. And again, all of this version controlled on GitLab. We have a data dictionary. This is held up on AWS EC2 instance. The hope was we were going to build this out for data requests. And in the meantime, the data requests will come into this dedicated email that everybody on my team gets. When we capture a request, we go ahead and we document it. We write the scripts to munge the data to satisfy the request, and then we go ahead and share it over. Importantly, we capture the entire request, all of the documentation, all the scripts, and the raw data that went into it, not only to archive it for capture metrics, but also to archive it in case that manuscript gets rejected or they have to resubmit it and they have to ask something. We have an exact copy of the data that was used that went into that manuscript. We get a diverse array of requests, anything from complete data dumps Sometimes we build cohorts for grant applications. A lot of times we're recruiting because we have all of these new sub-studies that are coming out, or simply just for people's research aims. We've had so many requests since I came on board. We've had 200 requests in the last 4 years that we've satisfied, and it became pretty apparent to us that, just under 25% are going outside the university. And of course, that goes through a data use agreement. And we have somebody that checks regulatory wise and make sure a memorandum of understanding and all that stuff is being checked over. But the vast majority of our requests are coming internal from the University of Michigan. So that made me start thinking, because I did a short stint over at Precision Health, that, there's a better way to share this data than through my team, right? And so that was the impetus to say, hey, can we push this over into Data Direct? And so Brittany worked with Jeremy and Chiwa to get our data in a format that can be pushed over into RDW, and then RDW obviously has linkages to Data Direct. So we had to convert our specific study numbers to MRNs, knowing that probably only 25% of our research participants are actually patients at Michigan Medicine. So that required us getting MRMs for all of these folks. Standardizing the variable types, that was not done in its entire completion. And when we harmonized and standardized, so that happened now. Importantly, increase the readability of column names. Now, having worked with the data now for like 4 years, I have a pretty good handle on what all of these data variables mean, even though there are probably, tens of thousands of data variables. But making those readable to, say, a person in the College of Engineering is important and that's a mission of Precision Health, right? So that was done. We completed a code work, which I know Susan has that at this point. We had to remove a lot of free text that we use in natural language processing projects, but the stuff that RDW is just not going to handle. And then very importantly, it had to be static. So the pipeline that we create to push the data over into RDW can't change. So that was very important. So after all of these adjustments, Jeremy and Chuak created the tables for RDW, and then we're able to push the data in. So each data file contains all the data for that given survey. We decided not to put together the PHQ and the HAMD. Like, they're all separate. Every single instrument is separated. And each row represents one participant at a specific time point. And then we were going to include both the item levels and the aggregate scores, because sometimes people want to know what the answer is on the MCTQ 24B, which is like a chronotype calculation, or they actually want to know just the score. So it was important to have both the item level and the score as calculated, documented, and provided to RDW. And then RDW then pushes it obviously into Data Direct. So when you go into Data Direct now, under the output view sections, you see the survey all the way down there. There's 2 versions, as you probably know, the Michigan Medicine version and the Precision Health version. Now in Michigan Medicine, you can go ahead and pop up the Prechter questionnaires. You can link this really nicely to the rest of their medical records for those who are getting care at Michigan Medicine, which I think is a really cool thing. Also, we know we have some overlap of our participants within the prompt survey or the prompt study. So any of our participants have questionnaires, we can link them to the prompt data as well. So the linkage that pushing this data over into RDW is like a win-win-win in my book, especially now that the Department of Psychiatry has instituted all of the PROMS measures. So those PHQs and ASRMs or whatever you're getting in EPIC as a patient are also being pushed into RDW. So we have that much more granular data that we can get on these participants. Because this is the mobile thing, I would be really amiss to not mention the mobile data pipelines that we have. Priori is a long-term study that has been going on in the university. It uses machine algorithms to detect emotional activation and balance from speech that's collected passively from participants on a smartphone. Steve is our primary engineer on this project. And as you can imagine, the PHI and the concerns of data security and stewardship are there. The voice is also transcribed and it's also annotated for emotion. and we can integrate that, or the researchers can integrate that with mood measures at any point in time. Then there's the EMA, which is our ecological momentary assessment data. And so this data is self-perceptions of emotional balance and arousal, and we can integrate that in with the Fitbit devices that will measure, psychological arousal and all that stuff, right? And that's through My Data Helps. So we have 2 projects now with My Data Helps, where we're SFTPing the data that's collected from the mobile application over into our tranche and integrating that all together. And then finally, Life Goals, which is it was an actual like a self-management educational module mobile application that built and grew to get more self-reported PHQ-9s and ASRMs and all that stuff. And then there's also a communication portal between provider. And the nifty thing about Life Goals is it's really centered on helping individuals to align their personal coping strategies with their goals. And that's all a mobile, it's educational platform first, and then there's the addition of we're collecting some survey measures on there, as well as having this provider portal. It is not running today, sadly. The feasibility study ended. I'm not sure if we have funding to continue it, but there is some interest to get it back up and running and out there. But the feasibility and the usability showed pretty remarkably with positive correlations that were statistically significant, that the more people use that application, the more their quality of life got better. And even assessed by standardized assessments, but also their own personal goals. So really important work that we're all doing with this mobile data application. So without the following people, none of this would work. You've already met Brittany, Steve, and Rob Lean. Clinically, Kelly and Sarah really keep us grounded in what's important to the patient. Both of them are clinical psychologists. And then Melvin, obviously, with his vision. So I'm going to stop talking. Happy to take questions. Wow. Either nobody was paying attention, which I often do. I multitask a lot, or email me if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer emails.
I do have a couple questions actually. Put them in the chat.
Yeah, shoot.
So the voice data, is any of that available in Data Direct, like either the actual sound files or the transcripts and annotations?
Nope. It's a good question. I think there's 2 hurdles, and I would let Jeremy speak to one of the bigger hurdles, which is just the sheer size of these files. But the scrubbing a voice file of pH is not an easy task, right? At the end of the day, Steve was managing like 10 medical students over a summer. Because just in random speech, you can imagine you say, oh yeah, my mom Victoria's birthday is on October 6th, so I really want to get her something. Like it's not, I think it's something that we would like to share, but the sharing has to be very tight. It's not a widespread sharing sort of study and data type right now. Gabriel, did you have another one?
Yes, but first I'll follow up on that. Have you ever thought about sharing like anything like AI generated from some files, like maybe sentiment capture or categorization of what the speech is about?
Yeah, and we have. So if an investigator would like that data, we can share it with them. So we have annotated the data with an emotional activation or valence, and we can absolutely share that data as well. And so that was actually, human annotated, and then we have the results of the machine learning algorithms. And I would say if anybody really wants it, to contact me and we'll figure out a way to get it to you.
Then my other question, yeah, can you talk a little bit about how you actually transfer the data to Data Direct? Like what tools or frameworks you're using?
I think they're being pushed as flat files. And actually, I think, Jeremy, you're just pulling it, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So there's a network file share that, on a cadence, I think it's once every month or something like that. I don't know what the cadence is, but it's a series of flat files, CSV files that we ingest through a Python script and load it into the database, and then obviously make it available in Data Direct that way.
And how does it get to the shared directory? Is there some other script pulling from RedCap into the files?
We pull from RedCap through an API script and then push it through our ETL pipeline on Python, which then one of those ETLs now is pushing to RDW, right? So there's the manipulation that Brittany had to do in order to push it into a format that Jeremy now has on RDW. And so there's a little tranche of that data that is in flat files, and then Jeremy through a network pulls it, right?
Correct. And there are two separate scripts. One is obviously the generation of the files that, Anastasia and her team controls completely. And then we have the script to ingest the data into RDW that we have full control over. That way it's kind of a clear delineation of the data and basically of the responsibilities. So.
Yeah. And I also want to add on, like, what we have internally is it has a lot more natural language stuff, the free text stuff that we collect that is not getting pushed into RDW. So, just by that reason alone, we needed 2 copies.
I saw that Rima had also raised a hand.
I did, and I just want to say my mind was blown. And so this is a comment, not a question. My mind was blown in that obviously, given what you folks are doing, you broke RedCap in terms of doing those on demand or in real time calculations, and so I had to snicker at that. And because I often try to tell my research teams, please, RedCap is not a data analysis tool. Please stop it. But I really appreciate not only did you break it, but then you took the step of saying, because what I do with my teams is I say, and remember, you're funded with biostatisticians. I'll export your data, go do your analysis yourself, right? But you said instead, no, we'll still do these calculations for you. We're just going to do it in a different way. And I'm sorry, my mind is blown on that. And I'm going to have to take a step back now and think about how I can be nicer to my research teams and think, for when we're talking about huge long-term, because you're not going to set this up for something you check once a quarter, right? So like for big projects, I need to think about this as an idea. Can we offer this? What are the measures that we really could be looking at more frequently without involving our statisticians to run the code and doing it in an automated way? So you've got me thinking. You've probably made me a nicer project manager to work with because I'm thinking about it now. So thank you. And
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that. Like, to me, reproducibility and transparency are paramount. And I know I'm talking to the choir here. But I think the most frustrating thing for a PI is to not be able to reproduce their analysis in their paper, right? So whatever we can give to them so that they don't have to question that the SF12 was recoded and scored the exact same way if you asked me today and then if you asked me 2 years ago. That, like, for a PI, I think then they can worry about more advanced statistics, right? Yeah, so I think it's important, and doing it in RedCap is just a really bad idea. But people still do. Like, I literally was just working with a collaborator, and I'm not going to name the name or the study, but I couldn't believe they scored everything in RedCap. And then I'm looking at the logs, and I found the study coordinator had changed one of the calculations a third of the way through the study. Yeah, so I had the ability to look through the logs and do that. I don't know how many people actually are mindful to think about doing that when they see an inconsistency. But yeah, so I wanted to lock it down. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, but some people might get frustrated that I locked it down.
I think that's a good thing.
And I know Jeremy will probably, collaborate with this, like the way they're scoring the PHQ in the electronic health record or the audit in the electronic health record, like those things can't move. They have to be static over time. And so I think he's locked it down as well. Am I wrong, Jeremy? I think you have.
What do you mean locked it down? I mean, we don't have any control over at the actual EHR level, but the study that we had for MyPACs a long time ago, the structure had to stay the same. The scoring had to stay the same. Otherwise, you'll end up having folks that are just not familiar with the data and not understanding that, oh, as of this date, now this score means this, and you need to be very transparent about that. And if they're not careful, then they will come up with incorrect, how do I put it, incorrect reasoning or incorrect solutions to something, so.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. That's exactly why I kind of punted to you because of that, because they will think different assumptions on the data based off of what they think. So you have to keep it static. Although I feel like it can be seen as being inflexible. And I don't know if anybody else has felt this, but I have felt this working with other PIs, that they just want to do it their way, and this is the way they're going to do it. And you have to have that conversation of reproducibility and transparency, and sometimes they're harder conversations. I did want to ask.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask, is anybody using REDCap Cloud? Okay, nobody.
Misher is not yet supporting the REDCap Cloud. There are a couple instances of it that are managed locally.
Yeah, I have those two folks, and I've talked to them. Okay. Just wondering if that's gaining traction at all.
Well, it's not a traction issue. So Misher gave an update at the metric meeting 2 meetings ago, I think, in August, and they're hoping to have it be supported. I'm going by memory, so anybody that was there, feel free to correct me. I think by spring. The problem is that it requires a fair amount of training for their team to be able to support it and offer it to the number of investigators that they work with. And so they're working on, they do have it like loaded and ready to go. And they're working on getting their team up to speed to be able to support it in an effective manner before rolling it out and allowing it, kind of out in the nether.
I appreciate that new information.
Yeah. So I have notes on the metric agenda from, I think, if not, I mean, if you look there, because you're on that list, if you look there and you don't see it, we can dig into it. But the update from Misher was awesome.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate I'm not a data I like data, but I'm not at the level a lot of you all are, being a project manager. And the more I hear and the more I see presentations like this, the more the pieces fall into place for me. And so I really, really appreciate the way that you presented the information. So thank you so much. Are there any additional conversation questions? So one thing that I have it, I don't know where it is on the agenda, but one of the goals of the Mobile Technologies Core is to offer data pipelines for investigators that we work with and support. And so we are having Anastasia and Giovanni and a variety of other folks that have built these data pipelines come together and share with us so that we do now have a study database, and we're hoping to crowdsource that information of what are best practices, what are lessons learned, and create a fresh data pipeline into the CORE's study database so that we can start piloting some studies using that study database, because not all departments have an Anastasia and a unit that supports the data end to the extent that you do. So we want to make sure that that is available to more investigators. So as we do that work, we'll keep you updated. Did you want to add anything to that, Gabrielle?
Nope.
Okay. So we have about 10 minutes. We did want to provide an update on the knowledge